The clatter of forks against plates sharply interrupted the unnerving silence that shrouded our Wednesday night dinner. I cast a lingering look across the table at Rowan, my partner of 6 years, searching his features for a glimpse of the person I had once deeply loved. Yet, he avoided my gaze, busily shoveling pasta into his mouth. Beside his plate, his phone caught my eye as a notification brazenly flashed, tempting me to look. Despite my initial hesitance, curiosity got the better of me. Rowan seemed completely unaware as I stealthily reached over, entered the unlock code I had memorized, and his secret was laid bare. The message on the screen was blunt and painful. "Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Meet at our place in an hour." It was from Marcel. I read it again, each word slicing through my heart like jagged pieces of glass. This message illuminated the cause of his recent aloofness, the unexplained late nights, and his distracted demeanor filled with illicit thoughts. "Everything okay, honey?" Rowan asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern, a tone he had evidently perfected over time. I slid his phone across the table to him, struggling to find the words. His eyes widened, and a slight panic flickered across his face as his mask of deception fell away. In that moment, it became painfully clear that the man I once believed I understood was nothing more than an illusion. As he began to utter, "I can't explain," I swiftly interrupted him by lifting my hand. "Save it," I said, my voice quivering with a concoction of heartbreak and outrage. "Just answer this, how long has this deception lasted?" He paused, his shoulders slumping as he resignedly confessed. 6 months. His admission hit me like a thunderclap. 6 months of deception during which I had loyally tended to our home and meticulously planned for a future with someone who had emotionally abandoned our relationship. "Who is she?" I pressed, although a part of me dreaded the confirmation of my suspicions. With a bitter laugh, he revealed, "Marcel, the vibrant young interior designer from my office." Does it even matter anymore? She brought back feelings I thought I had long lost. Each word he spoke sliced through me, shredding what was left of my trust and dreams. I felt an overwhelming urge to collapse, to let out a soul-bearing cry until my voice faded away. Yet I was determined not to display my utter devastation in front of him. Gathering every ounce of strength, I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I prepared to face the reality of our shattered life together. I snatched my purse from the table and made a beeline for the door. Behind me, his voice rang out, tinged with a hint of concern. "Where are you going?" Pausing at the threshold, I turned to face him, fighting back the tears that threatened to escape. "I'm leaving," I stated firmly, my voice resolute. "And I expect you to be gone by the time I return. I don't even recognize you anymore." With that, I flung the door open and stepped out into the chilly night, each stride away from the house reinforcing my decision to abandon the illusion of the harmonious life we had once portrayed. The idyllic vision of our future together had been irreparably broken, shattered beyond any hope of mending. That night, I found myself in a nondescript hotel room, where I spent hours crying, the gravity of Rowan's deceit pressing down on me. How could the man I had entrusted my heart to, who had vowed to cherish me, treat our sacred bond with such disregard? As dawn broke, still raw and determined, I reached out to a private investigator a friend had recommended during her tumultuous divorce. Within a day, he had uncovered a distressing amount of evidence that sent shockwaves of anger and disgust through me. Rowan's infidelity wasn't just a one-time lapse. It included multiple transgressions with different women, documented through emails, credit card receipts, and time-stamped photos in various discreet locations. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davies. The detective apologized as he laid out the evidence on my kitchen table. Your husband has been exceedingly careless in his actions. My hands clenched into fists as I fought back nausea. Among the faces and names, one stood out. Marcel. Her taunting text had blown the lid off the whole sordid affair. I need to know everything about her, I demanded, my voice cold and firm. Where she lives, where she works, every single detail. 2 days later, I had her address, a lavish apartment in an upscale area. Far more extravagant than anything I could afford on my own. It was clear that Rowan had been diverting funds to support his mistress in luxury, all while leaving me in the dark, overwhelmed by a sudden, reckless urge. I drove to Marcel's residence, using a temporary code provided by the investigator. I accessed the building and found her door conveniently unlocked. Seizing the opportunity, I barged into the apartment, instantly taken aback by the opulent furnishings that confirmed my worst fears. As I approached the lavish apartment, laden with suspicions of her extravagant lifestyle, a silky voice echoed from another room. Hello? Is that you? Rowan. My hands involuntarily clenched into fists as the tall, raven-haired woman emerged. Her presence defined by a silk robe that hugged her curves provocatively. Her eyes widened with a mix of surprise and alarm upon noticing me. You, I uttered, my voice seething through clenched teeth. You're the one who shattered my marriage. She displayed no signs of guilt. Instead, she raised a perfectly arched eyebrow and a mocking smirk played on her plump lips. Well, if it isn't the esteemed Mrs. Davies. I was curious when you'd come to scrutinize the woman your ineffectual husband can't seem to resist. A white-hot rage surged through me. Before I could check my impulse, my hand struck out, landing a resounding slap across her complacent face. She recoiled, gasping in shock, and a savage satisfaction surged through me as I wiped the smug expression off her face. You'll regret that, she hissed, her hand flying to her reddened cheek. Wait until Rowan hears about this. Rowan is leaving me for you, isn't he? I retorted, my voice laced with scorn as I advanced, forcing her to retreat against the wall. Let me spell it out for you. You home-wrecking viper. He's bankrupt. He's squandered our savings on hotels, gifts, and this opulent apartment, all to charm a gold digger like you. A flicker of disgust momentarily crossed her face before she regained her composure, her arrogance returning full force. We'll see about that, she sneered. This isn't over, Mrs. Davies. Not by a long shot. As I watched her retreating figure with a mix of revulsion and anger, the flames of vengeance within me flared higher and hotter. With a bitter snarl, I left the scene, my mind racing with thoughts of retribution. This isn't over. It's merely the start, I vowed silently, feeling the resolve harden within me. The intense confrontation with Marcel had left me boiling with fury, every nerve in my body like a taut wire ready to snap. I was a tempest of emotions, dominated by pain and an unquenchable thirst for revenge that echoed loudly in my heart. I made my way back home, my steps quick and determined, the image of erasing her complacent smile from existence consuming my thoughts. Upon my arrival, I found Rowan, who had moved his belongings into the guest room amidst my absence fueled by vengeful thoughts. His surprise was evident as I slammed the front door open with a force that reverberated through the house. "Alara, what's happened?" Rowan inquired, his voice laced with worry as he took in my wrathful demeanor. His question hung in the air, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within me. I didn't bother to respond verbally. Instead, I hurled the damning evidence gathered by the private investigator across the room. Printed emails, photos, and financial statements fluttered to the floor like confetti, revealing the extent of his betrayal. Rowan paled as he scanned the incriminating documents, finally grasping the full extent of the situation. "You've been engaging in multiple extramarital relationships," I said, maintaining a dangerously calm tone. "It seems you've been at this for over a year. And that's not even the most egregious part." I waved another set of documents in the air. These papers revealed the shocking amounts of money Rowan had been siphoning off into a secret account, likely used to support his opulent escapades with various women. "The finances, Rowan," I hissed. "How could you divert our funds to entertain your lovers?" Instead of expressing remorse, a flash of anger crossed his face. Rowan stood tall, ready to justify his misdeeds. His presence was charged with a defiant intensity. "Don't you dare take that sanctimonious tone with me," he snapped back. "You're the reason I ended up in this situation. Our marriage, Alara, has been devoid of warmth for years. How can you blame me for seeking happiness elsewhere?" His bold accusation left me reeling, my initial shock quickly turning into fierce anger. "Happiness?" I echoed incredulously, unable to accept his characterization of his affair with Marcel, the woman who had intruded into our lives. Marcel is far from being the enlightened, profound soul you think she is, Rowan. She's merely a manipulative opportunist exploiting your vulnerability. For a moment, doubt shadowed his expression, but his stubbornness held firm, preventing any admission of guilt. "Enough," he declared coldly. "I want a divorce, Alara. In fact, I've already spoken to my lawyer to start the process. I'm exhausted from your constant criticisms and our joyless life together." His blunt statement struck me like a dagger to my already shattered heart. Recoiling, I felt the room spin as the stark reality of my disintegrating world overwhelmed me. Through tears, I watched Rowan gather his things and walk out the door, never looking back. In mere moments, everything, my dreams, the life I had cherished, was obliterated by the man who had once vowed to love and cherish me until death do us part. What a vacant promise. Collapsing to the floor amidst the remnants of our shared life, I finally succumbed to the urge to scream, a piercing, soul-rending cry that shattered the numbness enveloping me. I screamed until my voice was hoarse, releasing the immense pain he had inflicted. Yet, as my cries subsided, a strange clarity emerged. Through my blurred vision, I noticed a familiar rectangular object peeking from a folder, the deed to our family home. In my name alone. Many years ago. During a meticulous session of estate planning, my father made a decisive move to put the house solely in my name, citing it as a precautionary measure. At the time, I dismissed his actions as another manifestation of his perennially grouchy demeanor. However, as I now felt the stirrings of retribution in my heart, I couldn't help but be silently grateful for his wisdom. His precaution meant that, despite the looming disaster, I wouldn't be left destitute. Clutching the deed to the house, I steeled myself to retaliate and rebuild from the devastation wrought by Rowan. If it was a war he desired, then I was ready to engage, my resolve just beginning to take form. The subsequent days morphed into a whirlwind of sorrow and fury. Many nights found me poring over the detailed reports from the private investigator, fighting the urge to cry. I knew well that tears would not help my cause. Action was necessary to preserve both my self-respect and financial security. Armed with a trove of evidence documenting Rowan's repeated infidelities and financial malpractices, I sought out Diane Hastings, a renowned and tenaciously effective divorce attorney in the city, known for her uncompromising tactics. Diane, in her iconic kitten heels, was a formidable force in the courtroom. As Diane reviewed the compiled evidence, her usually unflappable demeanor gave way to surprise. "Good God," she muttered, removing her glasses and looking at me with wide eyes. "In all my years, I've dealt with many dishonest spouses, but your husband's actions are shockingly flagrant." I managed a weak smile at her candidness. "Diane, can you help me ensure he loses everything?" A sharp, almost predatory grin appeared on Diane's face. "With this evidence, he won't know what hit him." Over the next few weeks, Diane and I meticulously crafted a strategy to decimate Rowan's financial standing and hold him accountable for his actions. Our plan was comprehensive. Not only were we going to freeze any hidden assets he had squirreled away for his extramarital affairs, but we were also aiming to secure a substantial alimony, given the egregious nature of his betrayals and financial misconduct. "This woman, Marcel, is key," Diane noted, tapping her pen against a photograph of the SMY home record. "If we can prove she was complicit in the affair for financial gain, we can go after her assets too. Trust me. Her interior design business is funding quite the lavish lifestyle." My heart raced at the prospect of Marcel experiencing the same ruin as Rowan. Since our venomous encounter at her apartment, she had been increasingly evasive. But with our solid plan and Diane's expertise, I was confident that justice would soon be served. She had disappeared, likely lying low and comfortably supported by the substantial financial backing of her lover. She was undoubtedly unprepared for the harsh reality that awaited her, much like the betrayal I had endured as his wife. Meanwhile, Rowan had retreated into a troubling silence, perhaps in denial or lost in dreams of a future with his mistress, now his fiancée. Little did he know that our once loving partnership was teetering on the edge of morphing into a fierce legal showdown that threatened to strip him of his wealth and reputation. The conflict reached a boiling point when Diane served a slew of legal papers at Rowan's doorstep, a motion to freeze all his assets, backed by solid evidence of his misappropriation of our marital funds to support his extramarital escapades. Faced with no other options, Rowan was compelled to confront the consequences of his actions in court. The palpable fear in his eyes during our first court appearance provided me with a bitter form of satisfaction for his cruel betrayal. His once confident mistress was notably absent, possibly grasping the serious implications of their predicament. Before I could further dismantle her financial safety net, a look of disgrace clouded over Rowan's face, swiftly transforming into anger as Diane methodically laid out the damning proof of his deceitful double life. From bank statements to hotel receipts bearing the names of his mistresses. His lawyer was caught off guard, scrambling to respond to the airtight case we had assembled. "You're making a huge mistake," Rowan muttered under his breath as the humiliating session drew to a close. Catching up to me in the courthouse lobby. For a moment, I saw a flash of the man I once loved in his eyes. "Alara, we can stop this. Reconcile. And start anew," he proposed, looking at him with icy detachment. I stood firm while Diane was ready to intervene should he escalate the situation. "Did you really think I would simply retreat and let you revel in your pathetic new life?" I retorted sharply. His face hardened, his expression twisting into a scornful sneer. "You'll regret this," he spat. Diane assertively moved forward, her hand raised in a clear gesture of caution. I responded with a nod that was both tranquil and confident. After the myriad challenges I had faced, his hollow threats simply glanced off, rendered ineffective against my cultivated shield of apathy. "Believe as you wish," I replied sharply, pivoting to walk away. "But keep one thing in mind as you ponder the consequences. You have only yourself to blame, Rowan. And I am merely beginning to fight." Following that tumultuous initial hearing, the courtroom showdown between Rowan and myself spiraled into a quagmire filled with acrimonious disputes. His legal team audaciously accused me of concocting tales, and the charges levied against me were ludicrous to the core, insinuating that I had covert rendezvous with other men as part of a scheme to entrap my own husband, a laughable assertion considering that he, not satisfied with mere flirtations, had engaged in numerous affairs throughout the duration of our marriage. Each recollection of his betrayals fueled my determination to stand firm against these baseless allegations. Diane, ever the stalwart ally, consistently bolstered my spirits, dismissing their claims as flailing efforts to muddle the clear truths. "The trail of evidence is unmistakable," she declared with unwavering conviction. "All it takes is one slight fissure in his crafted facade, and his entire narrative will crumble." Fate seemed more than willing to provide that crack in the most unexpected way. While I was updating the private investigator on the latest legal strategies, he made an offhand comment that sent a shiver down my spine. "That Marcel woman certainly gets around, doesn't she?" His words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I pressed for details. He disclosed, "I've been digging deeper into Miss Perfect, and it turns out she's not just involved with your soon-to-be ex. I have evidence she's also entangled with a wealthy, older businessman." A surge of incensed fury washed over me as I pictured that cunning, silicone-augmented fraudster playing her deceitful games with multiple men. Her pretense of innocence now fully shattered in my mind. Seizing the moment, a devious plan began to take shape. "Keep investigating this man," I instructed the detective. "I want comprehensive details, his identity, their meeting spots, everything." A mischievous grin appeared on his experienced face. "You have something intriguing in mind, don't you, Mrs. Davies?" he asked. My response was a look of unwavering resolve. Marcel believed she could manipulate married men without consequence. It was high time she tasted some of her own bitter medicine. Over the following weeks, Diane and I, along with the investigator, meticulously assembled a robust case against Marcel by substantiating her clandestine affairs. We managed to secure photographs of her entering a plush high-rise condominium owned by the business tycoon Christopher Woodrow, a 60-year-old mogul with a vast commercial empire and, crucially, a wife who was highly conscious of her public image. "You know what they say," Diane commented as we reviewed the surveillance photos of Marcel and Mr. Woodrow in delicate situations. Mistresses always reassure their married lovers that they would never leave their spouse for another woman. The revelation that her husband's mistress had been boldly engaging in similar daring liaisons with other wealthy individuals could very well drive Mrs. Woodrow to act decisively. My eyes gleamed with a vindictive glow as I anticipated the downfall of Marcel's pretentious, self-righteous facade. Her days of parading around with a sanctimonious attitude were numbered. As we were about to expose her numerous indiscretions, Marcel, who had manipulated the sacred vows of marriage for her deceitful gains, was about to see her carefully constructed world crumble. Rowan, her devoted fiancé, would soon witness undeniable evidence of her unfaithfulness. His disillusionment would be complete, a severe blow for a man who had devoted so much to their relationship. Both Marcel and Rowan, driven by their own mix of greed, arrogance, and lust, were perfect targets for the retribution I had been orchestrating. They were unaware that they were mere pawns in a game where the stakes were their public images and personal peace. After weeks of covertly collecting incriminating evidence, such as photographs and detailed call logs, I was ready to launch my devastating counterattack. With a sense of barely contained glee, I called Diane, my confidant and ally in this scheme. "It's time," I announced with a voice heavy with determination. "Let's bring this whole sordid charade crashing down." The annual Westbridge Charity Gala presented the ideal setting for my elaborate revenge. This glamorous, high-profile event would be attended by the city's most influential figures, including the unsuspecting couple, Rowan and Marcel. They would be there, likely reveling in their status as a rising power couple, little suspecting that they were on the verge of a spectacular public disgrace. As Diane and I entered the grand ballroom of the Westbridge Hotel, the venue was abuzz with the city's elite, all dressed in their finest. Our eyes quickly located Marcel, who was ostentatiously attached to Rowan's arm, wearing a striking red dress that was as bold as it was revealing. "Eyes on the prize," Diane murmured to me, echoing the resolve in my heart as I mixed feelings of disgust and a twinge of sympathy for the man I once held dear. "It's showtime," I thought to myself, reassured by the meticulousness of our preparations. As we mingled with the attendees, feigning interest in gathering donations, I discreetly passed to Diane's assistant the explosive material we had compiled on Marcel's affairs. Our cache of damning evidence was set to ignite a scandal that would ripple through the high society gathered here tonight. Within moments, the serene facade of the gala would be shattered by the shockwaves of the truths we were about to unveil. The reckoning I had so carefully planned for Marcel and Rowan was about to unfold before the eyes of their wealthy peers. And there would be no escape from the fallout. Murmurs began to spread through the crowd rapidly, igniting a buzz that soon turned into a full-blown spectacle. Guests gasped and whipped out their iPhones to capture the scandal unfolding before them as salacious images of Marcel with her affluent older lover spread virally across social media. It wasn't long before someone recognized the man in the photos as the notorious Christopher Woodrow. And the revelation of infidelity set off a storm of toxic gossip. Amid the chaos, Diane and I maintained a facade of innocence. Even as attendees around us reveled in the scandal with a mix of shock and delight. From my peripheral vision, I caught Marcel's expression turning pale. Her eyes locking with mine across the ballroom in a glare filled with fury and betrayal as she realized who had orchestrated her public downfall. A silent, victorious bingo crossed my mind. Just then, a sleek ivory shoe stepped into my view. My gaze traveled up the impeccably toned leg to find myself confronted by the furiously stunning Miranda Woodrow, Christopher's wealthy and now betrayed wife. "You conniving little expletive," she hissed venomously, her words punctuated by flying spittle as she seized Marcel by her expensively styled hair. "Did you really think you could continue to deceive me with him?" With a violent tug, Miranda spun Marcel to face the assembled crowd. And with a fierce yank, she tore the front of Marcel's dress, scattering sequins across the floor. Marcel's surgically enhanced features were exposed, prompting her to scream as camera flashes erupted like strobe lights, her arms flailing in a desperate attempt to cover herself. My attention then shifted across the room to Rowan, Marcel's fiancé, who stood dumbfounded and etched with a painful mix of shock and self-loathing. It was a twisted satisfaction to see him finally grasp the reality that Marcel had merely used him as another wealthy benefactor to support her lavish lifestyle. What I considered poetic justice was unfolding on this grand stage. The two individuals who had wreaked havoc in my life were now subjected to a similar savage humiliation. Marcel, having wrested free from Miranda, watched as Rowan exited the ballroom in utter hysteria. As he turned to face me, his eyes hollow, our gazes locked over a sea of bustling guests. In that brief encounter, I allowed my face to reveal the full extent of my vindication. Silently, I mouthed to him, "You brought this upon yourself," letting the words and their profound implications hang in the air like the distinct scent of Freudian guilt. His jaw tightened, and he reluctantly nodded, an acknowledgement that I had indeed delivered a formidable blow in retaliation for the wounds of my past life. Turning away, he disappeared into the night, leaving the echoes of the scandal to reverberate through the gala. As he navigated through the bustling crowd, his presence seemed to slice through the gathered individuals, creating a palpable pathway marked by embarrassment and ruin. I paused to take a leisurely sip of my champagne, relishing the delicious victory of the moment. Just then, Diane sidled up next to me, her face radiant with a gleeful approval. "Mrs. Davies," she murmured, her lips curling into a triumphant grin. "It appears tonight has been an immense success. Don't you think?" A mischievous smile spread across my face as I took in the disorderly scene before us, the product of my carefully orchestrated revenge. "You have no idea," I replied, a spark of excitement in my voice. "But I suspect this is merely the prologue to something spectacular." Following the catastrophic event at the Westbridge Gala, Rowan, now a shadow of his former self, did what any disgraced man would do. He returned, his typical arrogance replaced with a desperate plea for forgiveness. Observing him so reduced, stripped of his once commanding presence, filled me with a dark satisfaction. His habitual bravado from his days at shore, his unearned superiority, and his blatant disregard for my pain were all gone. Now, seated opposite me in Diane's office. He looked nothing more than a crestfallen stray. "Alara," he stammered, his voice faltering as he met my unyielding gaze. I don't know what to say. The whole debacle with Marcel. God. I was such a fool. I met his confession with silence, letting it hang heavy in the air until he visibly squirmed under the weight of my stare. "I know I can't undo the pain I've caused," he continued, his expression lined with genuine regret. "But I'm here, begging you, truly from the heart. Please give me a chance to make amends." I couldn't help but let out a harsh laugh. "Make things right," I echoed, incredulous. "Rowan, you betrayed me repeatedly with various women throughout our marriage. You squandered our finances. You lied. And you manipulated me at every turn. What on earth makes you think you deserve a second chance at anything from me?" His eyes widened as he finally seemed to grasp the full extent of his transgressions. Possibly for the first time. I was devastated when I realized how Marcel had merely used me. He confessed, his voice cracking under the strain of his newfound clarity. When the incriminating footage surfaced, it hit me hard, revealing the depth of my ignorance and how profoundly I failed you as a husband by allowing my desires to spiral so disastrously out of control. I met his gaze with a granite-like expression, unmoved by his late epiphany. Chose a path that obliterated the sanctity and trust of our relationship. The impact of Rowan's betrayal and deceit was too profound. His actions too destructive for mere apologies to rectify. His pleas, though seemingly laden with remorse and self-loathing, could not sway me. It was clear to me that his regret surfaced only in the face of losing what we had built together, rather than a true understanding of the pain he inflicted. "Do you comprehend the depth of betrayal?" I questioned him, my voice steady yet imbued with unmistakable anger. To be deceived and ridiculed by the person I entrusted with my heart, the man I envisioned my forever with, only to be paraded as a fool in the most demeaning manner. To find out that you dismissed our vows, regarded our years together as trivial, all for fleeting encounters with strangers. As I confronted him, Rowan's facade began to crumble. The weight of his actions seemed to manifest physically, his body shrinking under the invisible pressure, his face contorting with self-disgust and regret. It was a pitiful sight, watching him grapple with the magnitude of his misdeeds. "I am a monster," he admitted, his voice a broken whisper. "A selfish, despicable monster who doesn't deserve a moment of your grace. I don't expect forgiveness, Alara. My only hope is to somehow right my wrongs, perhaps through every financial means at my disposal, to cease being the reprehensible person I've turned into." His words, meant to evoke sympathy, only stirred a wave of revulsion within me. Part of me might have once found satisfaction in his suffering, but now, the mere thought of accepting his attempts at reparation sickened me. I had evolved past the vulnerable, impressionable woman he had once married. Standing up, I locked eyes with him, my gaze firm and resolute. "I don't want your money, Rowan. I want you out of my life completely." He looked taken aback, as though my words were a physical blow, his face morphing into an expression of stark disbelief. "Don't play dumb," I retorted sharply, suppressing the urge to erase his shocked expression physically. "After everything you've done, the lines you've crossed, Do you really think I'd be foolish enough to let you crawl back into my life? But Alara. No buts. I cut him off, leaning forward so that I was mere inches from his face. My voice unwavering. Agree to these terms now, and I will ensure the divorce proceeds swiftly. You can then fade into whatever sordid chapter you wish to write next. But you will never, and I mean never, seek my forgiveness again. Forgiveness and understanding were no longer viable. Not after the path of destruction he chose. His actions had irreparably damaged everything we had. And no amount of remorse could rebuild the shattered trust. Had heard. He had moved far away. Perhaps as a means to escape the reminders of the life we once shared. Each day, as I stood in the doorway of the home we once filled with laughter and dreams, I felt a mix of sorrow and strength. It was here that I would rebuild a life of my own design, unencumbered by the shadow of his past indiscretions. In the quiet moments, I sometimes found myself reflecting on how everything unfolded. Rowan had begun to treat our marriage vows with casual disdain. A fact that became painfully clear the day Diane laid the divorce papers on the table in front of us. She nodded subtly, signaling that the decision was mine to make. Your decision, Mr. Davies, she had said, her voice steady, the fine print on the documents looming large between us. You can either continue to fight this, or accept these fair terms and allow Mrs. Davies the peace she needs to move forward for good. The silence that followed was thick, almost palpable. Rowan stood frozen, a tumult of emotions playing across his features: anger, embarrassment, and a reluctant acceptance. With a heavy sigh, he picked up the pen and signed his name with a force that seemed to leave an imprint deeper than ink. Our eyes met briefly. Mine held a glimmer of triumph over his subdued expression. You'll never hear from me again after today, he said, his voice tight with emotion. But I hope you find the peace you seek. Alara, you deserve better than the man I allowed myself to become. With those final words, he left the office, his steps heavy with the burden of his regrets. I watched him go, my heart lighter with each step he took away from me. The man who had once been my entire world had now become a chapter in my past, excised like a malign tumor. It was time to close this painful chapter and step into a new reality. One shaped not by his betrayal but by my resilience. Diane gently placed her hand on my shoulder. Her eyes, usually piercing and intense, now radiated warmth and compassion. You did it, she whispered softly, her voice filled with awe and admiration. You've regained your strength and integrity in a way that's truly remarkable. I've never witnessed anyone, especially a woman, rise from adversity with such grace and resilience. I returned her gaze with a grateful smile, feeling an overwhelming sense of new beginnings and unexplored opportunities ahead. This is just the start, I confidently asserted, my voice imbued with determination and hope. My journey of transformation was only beginning. Half a year later, the final signatures on our divorce papers were dry, marking the end of tumultuous legal confrontations. I stood strong and triumphant, having secured the majority of our assets and the ownership of the home we once shared. Legally, Rowan was now prohibited from making any contact with me, a measure he likely found unnecessary. Given his indifference, I stood at the threshold of my new beginning, the master of my destiny. ready to reshape my life from the ruins of what once was. It was rumored that he had retreated to manage the fallout of the scandal and now lived in a quiet disgrace following our public debacle, which had effectively destroyed his reputation. While I found no pleasure in his distress, I was now able to progress, free from the shackles of our shared history. Once laid so low, my focus had solely been on my own recovery. But now I was ready to embrace a new chapter in life. There was a therapeutic relief in realizing that the man who had sought to ruin me was equally shattered by the events. The media had indulged in the scandal, enthusiastically dissecting every salacious detail of our divorce. They labeled the narrative a saga, portraying me as the scorned wife who triumphed over her unfaithful spouse, emerging as a divorce warrior queen. Although the term was somewhat crude, I couldn't deny a certain dark amusement in being celebrated as a folk hero by those who vicariously lived through my supposed revenge. It was a strange feeling, but not entirely unwelcome after the trauma inflicted by Rowan. Determined not to be seen as a victim, I resolved to rebuild my life with fortitude, resilience, and a desire to forge something positive from the ruins he had left. This resolve led me, nearly 3 months post-divorce, to organize a sophisticated gala in the ballroom of the Westbridge Hotel, the very site of Marcel's notorious downfall. The city's elite and affluent congregated, mingling among the towering centerpieces of fresh roses, with a string quartet enhancing the elegant atmosphere. This time, there were to be no sordid scandals or concealed affairs to tarnish my event. The event marked the debut fundraising gala for my newly established foundation, Lara's Light, which is committed to empowering women who have experienced the profound hurt of infidelity but have risen with resilience. During the evening, I delivered a speech that resonated deeply with the esteemed attendees, earning vigorous applause as I detailed our foundation's objectives. We aim to offer comprehensive support including counseling, legal representation, and financial aid to women navigating the challenging waters of divorce due to marital betrayal. A significant portion of the funds I received from my settlement with Rowan is earmarked to sustain the foundation through its vital early stages. From the stage, I passionately stated our belief that no woman should feel disempowered or isolated following the disloyalty of a partner. Our foundation is dedicated to fostering a supportive community that encourages healing and renewal. We strive to transform the aftermath of betrayal into a springboard for growth and independence, reflecting my personal path to empowerment. After I finished speaking, numerous guests approached, forming a queue to express their enthusiasm and support for the initiative. Each conversation was filled with heartfelt congratulations and pledges of support. At the fundraising event, I was approached by a series of eager potential donors, each ready to extend their support to my cause. I welcomed them with genuine smiles, feeling a deep sense of pride and purpose that filled my chest. It was almost surreal to think that not long ago, I was a broken soul, collapsed in despair on my kitchen floor. Now, here I stood, transformed and composed, a testament to what sheer determination and a relentless pursuit for justice could achieve. As I was engaging with the crowd, I noticed a new figure quietly waiting at the edge of the group. He was a trim, handsome man in his early 40s, with striking hazel eyes that sparkled with what seemed like genuine admiration. When it was his turn to speak, he introduced himself with a warm, "Mrs. Davies," his words carrying a hint of a British accent. "I must commend you on your profoundly impactful mission. The way you've risen from such profound heartbreak is nothing short of inspirational. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his eloquent praise and the polished demeanor he conveyed. He was impeccably dressed in a sharply tailored tuxedo, his sandy hair styled perfectly. All signs of a man who likely had access to considerable resources. "You're too kind, Mr. Douglas," I replied with a smile, recognizing the name. Nigel Douglas, isn't it? An associate of Christopher Woodrow. Though I gather you two might not be as close these days. Especially after the unfortunate scandal, I added, a playful note in my tone. Nigel's expression hinted at a shared joke as he mentioned his former association with the now disgraced magnate Christopher Woodrow, whose marriage had ended in a high-profile scandal. Indeed, Mrs. Davies. These days, our paths have diverged quite significantly. I am a journalist by profession, he continued, encouraged by my amused smile. But my passion truly lies in championing stories of courage, endurance, and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. A spark of electricity seemed to crackle in the air as our eyes met. A palpable tension that was hard to ignore. Nigel Douglas had an undeniable charm and was certainly more captivating than many I had met in recent years. "Well, Mr. Douglas," I responded, extending my hand with a flirtatious grin. "If you find my story so inspiring, perhaps you'd consider exploring it over a drink sometime soon." His handshake was firm and warm, lingering just a tad longer than usual. "I would be utterly delighted, Mrs. Davies. More than you could imagine," he assured me with a smile that promised intriguing conversations ahead. As he navigated his way through the bustling crowd of elegantly dressed socialites, a thrilling jolt of excitement surged through me, fueled by the prospect of new beginnings that lay ahead, free from the shadows of a painful past. The agony of Rowan's betrayal, which had once threatened to overwhelm me, was now a distant memory. Through sheer will and determination, I had managed to turn that deep despair into a monumental triumph. The future was now a blank canvas, eagerly awaiting my strokes. And this radiant evening beneath the gleaming chandeliers of Westbridge was just the prologue to the new chapter one had ardently fought to inaugurate. No longer merely a survivor of past afflictions, I stood reborn, a victor, rising phoenix-like from the smoldering remnants of my previous life. Do you have any thoughts after hearing the above story? Tell us in the comments section. We'd like to hear your thoughts. That's for today's story. Please subscribe and give a thumb up. See you next time.